Hello guys, and welcome back to a brand new video from me, Pickles Park Reviews. Now today I'm going to be reviewing the second episode of the Daleks animated series as part of Doctor Who Time Lord Victorious. But this time last week I reviewed episode 1, and while the animation wasn't great, on the whole I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed how it portrayed the Daleks as ruthless, and how they were scheming, and how they were trying to get into this archive and they schemed around it. I thought that was really cool. It showed the destruction of the Daleks. I liked a couple of the characters we met, such as the Emperor Dalek and the Strategist Dalek especially. I thought Nicholas Briggs voiced that Dalek really nicely. And also I liked the twist at the end with these robots and how there was this entity that actually wanted the Daleks. I thought that was quite cool. And overall it was pretty simplistic, not an amazing amount happened in that episode, but ultimately I think in terms of setting the scene, it did a pretty good job. Now we move on to episode 2, which is slightly longer than episode 1. I say slightly longer, it was only 2 minutes longer. And this one, it's a fair bit different to episode 1, in the sense episode 1 was quite full on in a sense. It was very much like all these epic battles of the Daleks trying to get into this archive. This one follows in a similar suit at the beginning, but generally it kind of tails off into more slow stuff. The Strategist Dalek's got to go on a mission and, you know, see these things, and ultimately it takes things a lot more slowly. And as a result of that, I'd argue I probably preferred the first episode more, but that's not to say that this one still wasn't entertaining, because it very much was, and it had some brilliant scenes in it, which I'll get onto. Essentially, in this episode, it picks up directly off of the previous episode. The entity is chasing the Daleks, and I like the fact that it actually explained how the entity knew the Daleks were going to be there, because I had a comment on my last video saying that, well, how come the entity knew that the Daleks were going to be there? Like, how was that? That's a massive plot hole. However, they do explain it in this by the entity being time sensitive, so it knows everything the Daleks are going to do. It's one step ahead, and the entity takes Skaro, they destroy Skaro, and it's like, oh Christ, these Daleks, they're on the run from the entity, and they're really on a losing battle, and the Emperor suggests that they go and call for reinforcements, even though the Strategist Dalek rightly says, well, if it's time sensitive, it's going to be one step ahead of us. So the Strategist Dalek goes to this place where there are these thousands of dormant Daleks there, and we get a brilliant scene between the Strategist Daleks and these dormant Daleks, telling them to awake and just pinning the philosophies of the Daleks into these newly birthed Daleks. It's a great scene, but ultimately it's revealed that the time-sensitive entity got there first, and the robot that is there voiced by Joe Sugg, the robot there had actually been possessed by the entity and changed the controls to the Emperor. So they thought that the Strategist Dalek was the Emperor. The reason for this being is that it turns out the entity wants to destroy the Daleks, but it wants to either destroy the Daleks or change them in some way, and it believes that the entity can convince the Strategist Dalek to become the new Emperor and take the Daleks in a different direction. The entity essentially has the choice of the Fourth Doctor and Genesis of the Daleks. That's essentially what it wants to do, and it believes it can do that through the Strategist Dalek. The entity essentially takes control of these Daleks, tricks the Strategist Dalek into essentially, you know, the Strategist Dalek says, you know, imprint the values in it, it needs to exterminate the enemy. And ultimately it's revealed that the entity actually obviously got in, and now these newly birthed Daleks wants to exterminate the actual Daleks. So there's a bit of a battle there, and the Strategist Dalek doesn't take the entity's offer. It destroys the robot and destroys the base, but obviously the newly birthed entity Daleks get out, start attacking the current Daleks. They lose all their reinforcements. They lose all their drones, and essentially then the Strategist Dalek goes in and is like, oh, we need to retreat, and the Daleks do, and they're like, oh, you know, why? And then the Strategist Dalek says, you know, it did give me another option, but that would have been impossible for you. It says like for you or something like that, and obviously that's very much foreshadowing that the Strategist Dalek may go against the Emperor Dalek, and I wouldn't be surprised, because he is one slimy and sly little bastard. Is the Strategist Dalek, and I love him for that. Yes, ultimately I enjoyed the fact that this was a lot slower, and I liked the fact that we had the Strategist Dalek going in and seeing these newly birthed Daleks and telling them to arise. As I mentioned before, that scene where the Strategist Dalek essentially imprints the Daleks' values onto this newly hatched batch of Dalek is really good. It's some of the best Dalek content I think we've had in a good few years. It was brilliant. I just thought it was so good. It really captured the Daleks in that one scene. And overall, as I mentioned quickly before, and I mentioned briefly in my episode 1 review, I really like the Strategist Dalek. I really like Nicholas Briggs' vocal performance, because he's just like the Strategist Dalek. His voice just seems so much more intelligent and sly and almost a bit mad, a bit more, yeah, just not as modulated, not what you'd expect necessarily from a typical Dalek. It almost reminds me as a slightly more sane version of Dalek Khan's voice from Journey's End. You get that vibe from him that he is like scheming constantly. You know, you don't feel as if you can trust the Strategist Dalek, and that's really like, he's a really compelling character. And although I really enjoyed the Emperor and the other Daleks that you saw in the first episode, I like the fact that we've focused on the Strategist Dalek in this, because I obviously said already in my episode 1 review that I really liked him in that, and it's great that we focused him on here. And yet obviously the Entity poses that question to him of he could lead the Daleks and change them, and obviously he doesn't accept it, but you can see in the back of his casing, not back of his mind, back of his casing, I guess you might say, that he is considering it. And you wouldn't be surprised if he went against the Emperor and went against the other Daleks, because that's just kind of seems like the Dalek he is. And he's really great. I'm really interested to see where they take the Strategist Dalek, because he's so interesting, and I think he makes this series worth it alone, because we don't usually see those kinds of Daleks, especially in the main show. And Big Finish, they experiment, but in the main show you only really see the box standard Daleks, really, especially of recent. You don't see these more scheming Daleks like you're seeing in this, and that's what makes this series so great, I suppose, is that we are seeing a different side to the Daleks, and we're getting Daleks like the Strategist Dalek, which you wouldn't have got in the main TV series, and I'm so happy about that. Joe Sugg was the only other vocal performance other than Nicholas Briggs in this, and he was alright. I think it's a bit weird that they're getting Joe Sugg to voice it, to be honest, because, I mean, I'm not being funny, but his YouTube channel is dead, like it simply is. Although he has seemed to have broken into the mainstream, I believe, since Strictly. I recall him, like, being a presenter on New Year's Eve, like, maybe last year or the year before. Bit strange, but there you go. They offered him this voicing part. I didn't think he was that great voicing the happy-go-lucky robot. I thought, oh, that's a bit jarring when he's speaking to the Strategist Dalek, which is so good, to get this really tonally jarring robot there. However, then when it's revealed it's possessed by the Entity, I thought Joe Sugg's vocal performance was a lot better, and I can see why they went for the contrast, although the happy-go-lucky robot initially was still a bit jarring to me. But I think that him as the Entity-possessed robot was a lot better, and I enjoyed his vocal performance in that capacity. I thought the Entity was really good. I like this idea of a time-sensitive entity, because it's something I've always been interested in. And it's something you saw flashes of in the main show and different things, but I think it's a really good idea, especially as a villain for this Dalek series, because it's something, you know, the Daleks are the most skilled fighting machines that you can get, so you would have needed something pretty special for the Daleks to fight that they wouldn't just instantly massacre. And this time entity is something really interesting, and obviously the fact that it can predict their moves means that the Daleks have to go outside the box in constructing their plans and doing what they're doing, which is really interesting. Yes, finally, let's talk about the direction and the music. In terms of the direction, I think it was a massive improvement personally. Obviously, I said last week it had some really nice shots, but also some shots that were a bit, which were a bit strange, like when the Daleks would just go right up to the camera. Bit strange in that first episode. However, in this, it kept the nice shots that you got in episode 1, but none of that weird camera-ness that looked like it was from a PS2 game. Honestly, there were some really visually appealing shots. There's a really nice shot where you see the Strategist Dalek and just all the Dalek, and when they slowly light up and you just have the blue lights from the eye stalks all over the place, and it's just got the shadow of the Strategist Dalek at the front, and then just you see all this entire army there, and all you can see is them illuminated by the blue eye stalk. that is a really nice shot. And also when the same army of Daleks is screaming, "We are the Daleks," at the Strategist Dalek, it does some Dutch angles. It is really experimental and really nice, and I like the fact that they're not just doing bog standard direction, which I was worried at the beginning of episode 1 that is what they were going to do. However, it just showed by this episode and parts of episode 1, but this episode especially, that no, they are doing some interesting and really nice shots, and the direction was really nice as well. And in terms of the music, not really much more to say, more of the same. It was great in episode 1, and it remained good here. Overall, I enjoyed episode 2 of the Daleks animated series. It wasn't as good as episode 1, I think, mainly because episode 1 was more action focused. This one was a lot more slow, and therefore it didn't feel as if as much happened as episode 1, even though technically it did because it was 2 minutes longer. But even despite that, I still really enjoyed it. I think especially it continued that theme from episode 1 of really nailing the Daleks and doing some interesting things with the Daleks. And the strategist, I liked him in episode 1, but now he's really becoming a really great character in this. I like the idea of the time-sensitive entity. I like the fact of this strategist Dalek who's a lot more sly and cunning and manipulative, and just you wouldn't trust him. You just wouldn't trust him, and that is great. I love the strategist Dalek, and just overall it's just a really nice series. There's obviously foreshadowing that the strategist Dalek will take up the entity's offer, will descend and will turn against the Emperor Dalek and the other Daleks. There's that foreshadowing there. I'm really excited to see what comes later in the series because, you know, despite the ropey animation and my preconceptions going in, I am actually really enjoying this series, and I would recommend you check it out yourself if you haven't already. Yes, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, drop a sub, and hit that notification bell to stay notified for all my latest videos. And obviously, what did you think of Daleks episode 2? Did you like it? Did you not? Whatever, drop it down in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear it. But yes, thank you guys for watching, and of course, a goodbye. I'm so